So we like talking about diagnostic techniques with Porsches and tips, things that you can use to fix electrical problems with your car. We've covered engine management systems, we've covered oxygen sensor and mass airflow sensor, but let's talk about electrical issues with Porsches. So if you have almost any electrical problem with your Porsche, it can be fixed a lot of the times with just a simple button push. On the 964s, it started with something called a system adaptation. If it didn't idle right, if it seemed to hunt or do other things or want to stall, you could actually run a system adaptation with what we call the Bosch hammer, and it would fix that problem. It's kind of like leaving your computer on all the time and then all of a sudden rebooting it and it fixing all kinds of things. There is something in the Porsches that you can do, but you need a factory tester to do that. You might be able to use the Durametric from Durham, but I got to tell you, this is the easiest way to fix most electrical problems. So with the Boxster, the 986, and the 911, the 996, we start with what we call a mini vehicle handover. Now we've come up with that term. This is something that doesn't exist with Porsche, but it's a simple lock and unlock of the car with the key fob. So I first learned about this around 2005 when we put a set of coilover springs in the car. And the car was doing weird things. The steering angle sensor, the dash was lit up like a Christmas tree and it didn't understand what was happening. So what we did was we locked the car. We got out, locked the car, unlocked the car, and got back in, and everything was fixed. It's the strangest thing. This is the world of computerized cars that we live in. So when you have an electrical problem, the very first thing I want you to do, other than making sure the voltage is there, the alternator is working, is to get out of the car, lock, and wait for a moment, and then unlock the car. So that's the first step. Then we get into what we call a vehicle handover. And you have to take the factory tester, and you go in, and you go into a special area, whether it's additional menu or there's different places depending on the year of the car, and you perform a vehicle handover. And it goes through this step. And it's the same as the older cars called system adaptation. But what it does is it puts it into transport mode and back out. When the cars are at the port in the very beginning, when they're new, the driver's window doesn't, I think only the driver's window works, the air conditioning doesn't work, certain things to make it unpleasant for the human. So they don't want to just hang out in the car on a hot day at the port. Well, what it's doing is kind of rebooting things in the car. Just like when your computer's been on a long time and you turn it off and back on. So that system adaptation is critical. And if your wipers don't work, your mirrors don't work, your fog lights, your seat heaters, all kinds of things can be affected. You just, if it's electronic, you want to run a vehicle handover. It takes minutes, and it can fix that problem. And I got to tell you, it's very common. And don't ask, well, why did that happen? We don't always know why, but we know that that fixes it. So before somebody goes and digs into your electrical system of your Porsche, or before they want to run diagnostic, just ask for a vehicle handover. And sometimes you have to do it 2 or 3 times. The windows don't drop. Different odd things are happening with the electrical system. Now, I'm not telling you that if you have an undercharging alternator or you have voltage drops in the systems where corrosion is there and the ground cable's corroded that goes to the engine from the chassis. All of those things are separate issues. But this is a good running car with no other issues other than that electrical problem. You want to run the vehicle handover and do it 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And then lastly, there is the Hail Mary, as we call it. It's the battery reset. What it is when you disconnect the terminals from the battery, and theoretically you're putting them together, but I like to run it through a bulb, like a resistance. There's something about computers, they have capacitors in them, and those capacitors will hold memory. So when you disconnect the battery, the mileage doesn't go away, or the memory of how it runs doesn't go away. And those capacitors are that memory. They hold on to just a little bit of energy. And you know, there are certain things that do go bad. Capacitors in the instrument cluster that hold the calibration of the fuel system. So if you have a C4 or a turbo, meaning a 911 four-wheel drive or a turbo, you may notice that if you get it back from the mechanic shop or the battery's gone dead, that the fuel gauge doesn't work. And that's a capacitor in the instrument cluster that will go bad, doesn't hold its memory. And the easiest thing to do right off is to go and fill the car up, because you're teaching the instrument cluster the full range of the tank, of its reading. I'm not telling you that'll fix it, but that's a good thing to start with. So this battery reset is scary because it basically takes all the memory out of all the capacitors and drains everything. So you want to be careful when you do it, because when you do it, if you go out and drive the car and the car had a misfire beforehand, you can damage the engine. I can get into that further later, but you want to be careful with this. I like to run the current flow through a bulb. You can use a test light, an incandescent test light. Don't use an LED. And what you're doing is you're slowing the transfer down of that energy. And then when you reconnect the battery, it'll start fresh. So hopefully, between the mini vehicle handover, the vehicle handover, and the battery reset, we call it a hard reset, you should fix your electrical problem. Again, the mini vehicle handover is something we came up with. It's not really in any books other than our training manuals. And I hope that helps.